İngilizlerden açtık madem lafı, İngiliz istihbarat servisinde yıllarca çalışan ancak bir kumpasa gelip ortağıyla birlikte ölümlerden dönen, ortağı öldürülen, kendisi de İngiltere'yi terk edip Avrupa'nın değişik şehirlerinde yaşamak zorunda kalan İngiliz istihbaratının önemli isimlerinden MACHON. Bakın sevgili Mevlüt Yüksel'e neler anlattı. İzliyoruz.
Trying to recruit agents, because that's doubt. I don't think it would be likely that she'd be on some sort of useful idiot, which is someone who has their own agenda, their own political aims. Old investigations, when an explosion happens, there is chaos in the immediate aftermath. This sort of attack does happen. All countries use these sort of dirty tricks to gain politically what they're seeking to achieve. Certainly the US has done that, Russia has done that, the British have done it, the French have done it, the Israelis do it, go and attack that political enemy. So if you follow on this reasoning about dirty tricks, or what we say in the West, false flag attacks, I suppose there is a possibility that it could be something planned from within the NATO alliance. I was very surprised to read that she was there during these military operations. I don't think it would be likely that she'd be on some sort of intelligence gathering mission. I think she was probably on what we call a fact-finding mission on behalf of aspects that she is personally interested in. So she's very involved in a women's independence forum within the UK. And of course there are concerns about the fate of the women within this war zone. You know, some of them being snatched by ISIS, sold on as sex slaves, that sort of thing. So I should imagine that she was probably there, rather recklessly, it has to be said, in the middle of a war zone, trying to gather information around that. There are spies from all the major players in the region running around the southern edge of Turkey and, of course, across Syria. We know, for example, that the CIA has put personnel on the ground. They've been advising certain of the dissident Syrian groups. We know as well also that MI6, the UK intelligence agency, has been doing pretty much the same thing within that region. It would be naive to think that all the major players don't have intelligence personnel on the ground and aren't trying to recruit agents to get as much information as they can from all the different players, be it the al-Nusra Front or ISIS or the Kurdish army or whatever. So I think there's probably quite a lot of them all running around trying to gather the same sort of intelligence. The Canadian intelligence service works incredibly closely with British intelligence, as well as, of course, with the Americans, with Australia and New Zealand. They're part of what's known as the Five Eyes Cooperation Group. But the case of this people smuggler is rather strange, because I know that the Canadians have denied any connection with him. However, he said that he had contacts with Canadians from their embassy in Jordan. It was also reported that he was trying to get a Canadian passport. These sort of diplomatic outposts will always be looking for sources of information, sources of intelligence within areas of interest. So it's not inconceivable that this man was a very low-level informer, an agent, providing small bits of information to the Canadians. That doesn't mean he's officially spying for them. He probably was seen as someone who's vaguely useful, and he talked his role up in order to try and get leverage from the Canadians so that they would protect him and give him a passport. So I think that's probably what that role was for this man. I don't know how many intelligence personnel will be on the ground, and even if I did, I couldn't say. But I would expect that there would be intelligence officers trying to run agents, trying to recruit agents on the ground from a whole range of different intelligence agencies. And of course that would also include the Turkish intelligence agencies. And you know, they will always be there trying to recruit agents, because that's the best source of intelligence you can get, where you have human beings on the ground that you can task to find out specific information and debrief specific information. So human agents are always seen as the best form of intelligence, much better than electronic surveillance, for example, because that you cannot target, you just pick up what is out there. And of course many people now, if they're involved in an organisation like Daesh, for example, are going to be very sophisticated in avoiding electronic surveillance. They will be less sophisticated in trying to track down human agents working against them. Certainly hypocrisy, there is no doubt about that. And we see both Turkey and Russia being attacked in the same way for trying to protect their homelands against their terrorist enemies. Of course, what happened in France was horrific. It caused this huge international outcry, and they have issued a state of emergency, which the government has re-ratified recently, which takes away all their basic human rights in France for the duration of that state of emergency. And there is a lot of anger and a lot of concern politically, but people seem to go along with it because it makes them feel safer. So I would suggest that what Turkey does when it cracks down on a terrorist organisation is probably of the same magnitude. So yes, it is rank hypocrisy on the part of the West to say, in our country we can do this, but in your country you're violating human rights. All governments need to protect their citizens. Suggest as well, though, that all governments can go too far in doing so. You need to have a balance, proportionality within a functioning democracy, so that your very way of life is not eroded, so that you're not perceived to be running a police state, which actually France is at the moment. So you need to get that balance between the liberties of the people and protecting them as well. And it's a very difficult balance to achieve always in democracies. And there always needs to be a healthy debate and a robust awareness, pushback against encroaching police tactics and police states. After the Charlie Hebdo attacks, all the world leaders were magically available to go to Paris and demonstrate and show solidarity with the French. And again, I see this as hypocrisy. It's almost like they're saying that French lives are more important than any other victims of terrorism anywhere else around the world. So yes, of course, in Turkey, these are appalling attacks, particularly the one last weekend. They're huge scale. And yes, right, as you say, there is no outpouring of grief from the world's leadership. And we saw the same thing as well when the Russian holiday jet was shot down over Sinai last year. Again, an appalling attack, but there was not this outpouring of global grief in support of the Russian victims of that attack. Compare and contrast what happened when MH17 was blown out of the skies above Ukraine, and because these were largely Western tourists, Western targets, again, there was huge condemnation of Russia and huge outpouring of grief and support for the Dutch who lost their lives on that attack. So there does seem to be one rule for the Western countries and another rule for the victims of attacks in other, actually allied countries. And I think that is hypocritical. Critical, in my view, is the sort of daily bombings that go on and the drone strikes that kill innocent people carried out by America across the Middle East and across Central Asia. And that doesn't even get a mention in the Western media, largely. And yet thousands of people have been killed, thousands of innocent civilians have been killed in these attacks, and they're not even mentioned. So the West is sending out a very strong, rather disgusting message that the lives of people not from Western Europe are nowhere near as valuable as the victims of terrorism that happen in Western Europe. And I do think that's a very unhelpful as well as hypocritical line to take. No, I follow the case of Alexander Litvinenko very closely. Obviously, it was fascinating and tragic. There's no doubt that it was an assassination, and there's no doubt that it would have to be a sort of state-level actor carrying out that assassination, because getting your hands on polonium-210, which is incredibly rare poison, incredibly rare isotope, can only really come from a state-level player. Having said that, the investigation was completely mucked up by the police. And the inquest into his death was so long delayed that it was inevitable, I suppose, that the official line would be stuck to, which is it had to be the Russian government that carried out this attack. The reason that the inquest was delayed and delayed and delayed was because at the time of his death he was working as an agent, an informer, for MI6, the British intelligence agency. And this is on their patch in London, and they always say that they always protect their agents. They're the most crucial form of intelligence, and yet MI6 couldn't protect this guy from his enemies. Now, there does seem to be very strong evidence pointing to the fact it was Lugovoy and his accomplice, former KGB officers, who carried out this attack. They will never be extradited. They will never be sent over to the UK to stand trial, because the Russians just won't do that. Just as the Americans don't extradite their citizens either, even when they've been found guilty of things like torture in absentia. So I don't think there will ever be justice on this. There will never be a criminal trial where the evidence will have to be tested at the highest level in front of a jury. So we just won't know. It's always going to stay relatively open-ended. No, I think the fact that Putin yesterday suddenly announced that he was withdrawing the vast bulk of the Russian forces within Syria was a masterstroke of strategy. It's really clever tactics, because he now looks very statesmanlike. He said that there was specific aims in Syria. He would go in, level the playing field for President Assad, but he was not there to keep Assad in power forever. So by withdrawing now, just ahead of the Geneva peace talks, he's basically sending a message to Assad saying, okay, you've got a better chance now, but you need to get around this table and make meaningful concessions during these peace talks. It's classic conflict solution and resolution. So I think that was a very clever step that Putin took. I also think it's a shame that the relationship between Turkey and Russia has broken down largely over the last few months, because of course they were key economic allies, and that was a very powerful alliance for both countries to have in place, particularly when it came to developing gas pipelines between Russia and southern Europe. So no, I think what he's done is very, very clever. And he is not overextending himself militarily. He has shifted the balance of power within Syria to give Assad a fighting chance, which is what he said he would do. And he looks very statesmanlike, as opposed to the Western allies, who have made a pig's ear, a complete mess of the whole of their intervention within Syria itself. So no, it's a very clever move. Any specific information about the Gülen movement? No. However, it is interesting that he has found a refuge in America, and the Americans have refused to extradite him. So perhaps he's got more Western support. In that case, then, his movement and the schools he's setting up and all that sort of thing could be perceived, perhaps, to be a sort of Western-inspired opposition movement to the elected government in Turkey. It wouldn't be a surprise, because America does this to many, many countries to foment what they call the colour revolutions. And also we saw as well that Western and American meddling in Ukraine toppled the legitimate government of President Yanukovych. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that America is meddling in this way with Turkey and using the Gülen movement as a sort of proxy movement within Turkey to destabilise the elected government. I don't know if that's 100% the case, but it would fit a pattern of how America operates within other countries. And there would be no point Turkey saying, we're members of NATO, we're allies. If it suits the American agenda to interfere, then the Americans will do it. They always put their interests first. No, if he would be an agent. Certainly he seems to be what the intelligence agencies call a useful idiot, which is someone who has their own agenda, their own political aims, which happen to mesh with the sort of covert aims of other intelligence agencies. So I wouldn't rule that out. I think, though, he's too high profile to actually be an official agent of an intelligence agency. But I'm sure with his profile and with the sort of work he does, he is definitely useful. He's a useful idiot, a useful tool to pursue the agendas of other countries, potentially. Just to make mischief and destabilise a country even can be a very useful thing to have someone like him doing. That there is, in a sense, a sort of proxy war going on in Syria with different foreign countries backing different groups for their different political agendas within Syria. So, of course, Daesh itself emerged from the mess that was Iraq and the Ba'ath Party, and they have received significant aid, significant support from various other players, be it Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Americans or the British or even the Turks. There has been information, there has been rumours of assistance and backing and the provision of money and arms to Daesh. And also other organisations as well. There's no doubt that they have been supported, at least with perhaps communications aid, by Western intelligence agencies. Then, of course, the Russians get involved because Assad has always been a client of Russia. And it became a sort of proxy war between Russia and their allies and the West and their allies within Syria, even though they were all supposed to be fighting Daesh. So it is a mess, and it does have the potential to escalate into a wider war in the region. One of the other aspects that I find fascinating in terms of these competing needs from foreign countries, it was the proposed gas pipeline that Russia and Iran wanted to build between Iran over Syria to Europe. And of course, Iran is another client state of Russia's. So building this pipeline and allowing Iran to export a lot of energy from its own country over Syria and directly into Europe would have been a very good move from their perspective. Of course, other countries had other reasons for trying to stop that, not least Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who, with American backing, wanted to build a different pipeline to export Qatar's natural resources across Syria and into Europe. And this is why, I think this is one of the key reasons why America and its Western allies has been so keen calling for the overthrow of President Assad, because he would block that pipeline between Qatar and Europe. So these are the sort of issues you've got to look at as well, in terms of why these different countries back certain different groups within Syria, and what the deeper game is in terms of what they're playing at. So of course, Saudi is quite happy to back ISIS. They wouldn't mind seeing a very sort of fundamentalist regime in place in replacing President Assad. Type regime within Syria, but either one would work to their agenda because they would get their pipeline into Europe. Whereas, of course, Russia didn't want that, which is why it intervened to try and prop up President Assad. Obviously, the southeast of Turkey is a very sensitive area at the moment, with the situation with the Kurds and also the situation in Syria. So, of course, it's going to become a magnet. It's probably the safest place around that region that foreign journalists, foreign spectators, foreign politicians can get to assess what's going on. And I would have no doubt that there would be intelligence agents working and embedded within these sort of these sort of groupings. It would just be inevitable that any country with a vested interest in that area, in the Syrian war, would be trying to infiltrate agents into that area to get information. There's no doubt about that. It's just logical. That's what any intelligence agency would do. But beyond that, that's just speculation. The other interesting aspect to the whole mess across the Middle East is why this is going on. And people always say, well, these sort of wars, the intervention of America, are about oil wars, energy resources. And yes, I think that's largely true. However, what's even more interesting is this next step behind that, which is it's actually the money in which the oil is being traded that is the fundamental issue of relevance to the American interests. So if you look at all the countries America has gone into, we've had Iraq, Afghanistan, we've had attempts against Iran, we've seen Libya completely destroyed, and now we've seen Syria being largely destroyed because of America interventionism. And yes, there are oil reserves there, but they created such a mess that it's become impossible to exploit these energy reserves very well. But the key thing, as I said, is the money in which this oil is traded. So if you look at these countries, Iran wants to start trading its energy resources in euros. The same with Syria, the same with Libya almost, because Colonel Gaddafi, before he was deposed, actually said that he wanted to establish an African gold dinar backed by the Libyan oil reserves. So you have this situation where suddenly all these major oil resource-rich countries want to move away from the American petrodollar monopoly. And if the world starts stops the dollar being the reserve currency of the world, then that is going to undermine the American economy fatally. I mean, it's already in debt, it's already overstretched. The only leverage they have internationally is the fact that the dollar is the reserve currency. All these countries were threatening that. All these countries have been attacked.
Kalem ülkede bir izleyicimiz tweet atmış. Bekir Bey diyor, 2 haftadır kafama takılıyor diyor.
Neymiş o?
Siz bu insanları ajan olduğunu nereden biliyorsunuz? Neden devletlerini satıyorlar diyor. Buna benzer sorular çok geliyor sevgili seyirciler. Bu ajanları nereden buluyorsunuz? Niye konuşuyorlar diye.
Ama MACHON diye yazsınlar Google'a, Wiki'ye girsinler. Kadının CV'si ortada.
CV'si ortada. Biz bunları nereden buluyoruz? Bilgi aldık. Geçen sene Ergün.
Evet.
Her sene yıllarca istihbarat örgütlerinde çalışan,
Rakip olarak
çalışan, emekli ayrılan, ülkesinden kovulan, karşı tarafa çalışıp hata yapıp atılan ne kadar 200'e yakın istihbaratçı Berlin'de bir araya geliyorlar. Evet. Geçen sene sevgili Mevlüt Yüksel'i oraya gönderdik. Mevlüt 200 portföyle döndü buraya her gün. Bu kadar basit. Gazetecilik yaparsanız takip edersiniz. Bu kadın ülkesini niye satıyor diye tweet geliyor ajan olarak. Çünkü İngiliz istihbaratındaki iç çekişmelerden dolayı kurulan kumpasta ortağı öldürülüyor. Ölmemek için ülkesini terk edip Avrupa'nın diğer şehirlerinde yaşayan ve İngiliz istihbaratına çalışırken o istihbarattan nefret eder hale gelen bir kadını bulursan, ajanı, bunları konuşturursun, bu cümleleri alırsın. Öyle değil mi Ergün?
Bekir, bulunmak çok zor değil. Biraz gazetecilik istiyor, evet. Ama bu soruyu soran kardeşime şunu söylemek isterim.
İyi niyetle soruyorlar.
Tabii ki. Biz en iyi ve diğerlerini getirsek. Şu anda Türkiye'nin en büyük haber kanalı A Haber. Ama 3 rakibimiz var. İsimleri saymaya gerek yok. Kapılarına kadar götürüp bıraksak tek kelime konuşturamazlar arkadaşlar. Burası A Haber. Yazar Gündiler.
Yazboz.
Asla ve hatta kapıdan içeri sokmazlar. Amaç bulmak değil, konuşturmak. İşlerine yaramaz bu konuşulanlar. Çünkü bizim ülkemizde görünmeyen kurallar vardır. Medyanın bir kısmı bu görünmeyen kurallarla yönetilir, ilkeleri vardır. Onu da burada yazmamışlardır. Aslında en iyi, belki haftaya Murray konuşur, aslında konuşursunlar. Biz götürelim bulamıyorlarsa bir saniye yer ayırmazlar Bekir, ayıramazlar.
Türkiye aleyhine konuşma olursa yazarlar.
Sıraya girerler.
Şimdi bak, onu yazarlar.
Tabii ki.
Derler ki İngiliz uzman diye tanıtırlar bir de bize.
Tanıtımını yaparlar.
Derler ki Türkiye çok kötü yolda, inanılmaz açıklamalar.
Biz Bekir Azar'la burada isteyen arkadaşlarımıza yardım edeceğiz. Keşke bu programları çoğaltabilsek.
Evet.